Good afternoon, everyone. We will now begin the meeting of the Cook County Commission on Social Innovation. Today is September 12th, 2024. We will call the meeting to order. Chair Anaya is not present today, so for the record, I will be presiding for today's meeting. Can Andrea please call roll and indicate if quorum has been reached?
Commissioner Anaya, Commissioner Lee,
Present.
ex officio criticos, Commissioner Ellsbury, Commissioner Alston,
Present.
Commissioner Anderson, Commissioner Brutus, Commissioner Caliendo, Commissioner Cooley,
Present.
Commissioner De Laurentiis, Commissioner Dubois, Commissioner Durlaw, Commissioner Flores,
Here in the place.
Commissioner Freeman, Commissioner Johnson, Commissioner Siskillen,
Present.
Commissioner Mayo, Commissioner Miller,
Here.
Commissioner Raymer, Commissioner Rice, Commissioner Roger, Commissioner Schleicher, and Commissioner Thomas. We do not have quorum.
Thank you very much. Let's move on with public testimony. For the record, a public testimony request or any written comments can be submitted up to 24 hours in advance of the meeting to 7thdistrict.office@gmail.com. Can staff please indicate if we had anyone sign up for the meeting to testify or provide written testimony?
There is no public testimony at this time.
Thank you very much. So for the record, no public written or oral testimony was submitted. Inasmuch as we do not have a quorum, we will defer the approval of the minutes of the last meeting. And I would now like to move ahead and introduce our very special guest witness. Dr. Reuben Jonathan Miller received his bachelor's from Chicago State University, his master's from the University of Chicago, and PhD from Loyola University in Chicago. He's an associate professor at the University of Chicago's Crown Family School of Social Work, Policy and Practice, and also teaches in the Department of Race, Diaspora, and Indigeneity, just like I said. He's also a research professor at the American Bar Foundation. Previously, he was a social worker and former chaplain at Chicago's Cook County Jail. He is the author of an award-winning book called Halfway House: Race, Punishment, and the Afterlife of Mass Incarceration. In his actionable policy recommendations this afternoon will derive from some of the commentary within that book relating to returning citizens and how their experiences within the criminal justice system adversely impacted their life on the outside, both in terms of recidivism and community violence, and some very specific recommendations along those lines for our consideration. I would be remiss, however, if I did not mention that he is also a MacArthur Fellow, commonly known as a MacArthur Genius. So whereas all of us believe we're geniuses, this gentleman actually has a piece of paper in the check to prove it. So we welcome Dr. Miller. Thanks so much for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, commissioners and guests for coming. Thank you for your work. Thank you for caring about disadvantaged people. And so I'm gonna talk a bit from. I'm gonna share findings from some work I've done over many years. I spent about 15 years following people out of jails, prisons, police station lockup facilities. I started to work in 2003, as was mentioned, I was a volunteer chaplain at the Cook County Jail. Did that for about 5 years. But then as a researcher from about 2008 forward, spent time with people who were moving into and out of criminal justice institutions. And that was really all across the country. The book that I wrote follows people mostly in Chicago and Detroit. And so I'm going to talk a lot about Detroit today, or at least people moving into and out of Detroit. I'll talk a bit about folks moving into and out of Chicago, but I'll focus mostly on the landscape and the discussion that I hope to have is about how we respond to people's need, how we respond to need, and really questions about what the right thing to do is when you're faced with need. And so anyway, so we'll go to the next slide and move forward. So this is a photo of James Baldwin and Dr. King, of course, but and there's this quote from Baldwin that helps frame, I think, what I'll have to say, which in response to a question, well, really he's writing, you can find this essay in this book, the price ticket, but he says if one really wants to know how justice is administered in the country, you don't ask the judge, you don't ask the policeman, you don't ask the politician. If you really want to know, you go to the unprotected, or those precisely who need the law's protection most. Next one. He says, you ask any black man, ask any Puerto Rican, ask the wretched how they fare in the halls of justice, and then you'll know not whether or not the country is just, but you'll know whether or not it has any love for justice or any concept of justice. Next one, please. Any love for justice or any concept of it. It's a striking thing to say. Does the nation have any love for justice and concept of it? And who do you ask? You ask people who are at the tail end of the justice system, the people who are directly impacted. So one question might be, what does this look like? And perhaps I'll talk to you about one of the folks who I follow. So I mentioned that I spent about 15 years following people. The book that I wrote is really the culmination of spending time with about 250 people across the country. As I mentioned, most of which are in Detroit. One of these guys was named, I call Jimmy Caldwell in the book, and I meet him on the coldest day of the year. It's February, it's 2014. I meet him at a place called the Rosa Parks Transit Center. And so the Rosa Parks Transit Center is the central bus terminal in the city of Detroit. Detroit has an awful transit system. It's not like our transit system. Our transit system is a bit advanced in comparison to Detroit's. But anyway, so I meet him on the coldest day of the year, and I follow him after he's been released from prison. He spent about 8 years inside. His crime was grand larceny and a few other crimes related to theft. What he did was he set up a Home Depot in an abandoned building, in the basement of an abandoned building. He would sell goods out of that. A Home Depot is what he called it. He'd sell goods out of that basement. Goods that he stole from other abandoned buildings. So he'd sell copper, he'd sell equipment that he find or whatever. Anyway, so I meet Jimmy after this long bit, and he's given a list of things that he has to do. Now, there's some important things to know about Jimmy that perhaps make him a sympathetic figure, perhaps not, who knows. But Jimmy's got bipolar disorder. He's diagnosed with this in a community mental health agency. He does 8 years inside without access to medication because we know that healthcare inside jails and prisons is notoriously poor. And he gets out and given a list of things to do. So he has to find a job, he has to report to job training, he has to do counseling, and he has to go to a workforce development agency right away. And so I'm following him on these days. I meet him at the bus station. As I mentioned, it's February, it's 2014. It's teeth chatteringly cold. This is one of those days where you see your breath, and I've got a cup of coffee in my hand, and I don't want to have it because the coffee's dripped down the side of my hand, and it's cold outside. And we have to walk a half hour from the last bus to the Workforce Development Center. And I follow Jimmy. And the whole time that we're walking, this half-hour walk in the bitter cold in Detroit, which is cold like Chicago, he's complimenting me the whole time. He's trying to put me at ease. And I'm from Chicago, I'm from here, so I'm not a visitor, and so I get a little leery when people compliment me too much. I wonder what they're trying to do. But Jimmy is telling me how nice it is to spend time with a quote brother like you. He tells me over and over again that he's glad to be doing something positive. You know, in this case, talking to me about the criminal justice system in hopes that perhaps there's some reforms that might come out of it. And I'm wondering why he's doing this. So we get to the Workforce Development Agency after this long walk, and I understand in a deeper way perhaps why. The building is closed, and I don't mean it's too early, it's too late, or perhaps they're closed for the day or something like that. No, this is a gray stone monstrosity. There's a loose leaf printout taped to the front door. The building itself is closed, it's been closed down. There are no services available inside the building. The lights are not on. And on the loose leaf sheet of paper is a list of services that Jimmy could have gone to, other workforce development agencies that he might have been able to go to, the nearest of which was about 9 miles away. Now, Jimmy didn't have money for bus fare. He depended on me. I handed out, because during my interviews, I give people a bus card. I give them as an incentive to spend time with me. I give him a gift card for $40. He used that to pay his phone minutes. And besides that, I mentioned that it was very cold. Jimmy would have had to have walked the 9 miles to the social service center, the workforce development agency. But this was a court order for him to go. This is a part of his conditions of release. This is a sheet of paper that judges hand you, or that whoever the person who hands you your paperwork when you walk out of the prison. On that sheet might be things that you can't do. Stay away from certain neighborhoods. Don't drink. Don't stay out after curfew. Don't cross state lines. But there are also things that you must do. This is different for people with records, people who are coming home. It's different for them than it is for everybody else. In fact, these are things that you must do. People can be compelled to do things like go to treatment, like go to a workforce development in this case. And if you miss those appointments, Jimmy was afraid that he might be sent back to jail. And he's right. These are called technical violations of parole, and about a quarter of prison admissions each year are directly related to technical violations. So here I am with Jimmy having to be at an appointment, sent to a place that's actually closed. It does not exist, in fact, at least not in this building. And the nearest place is 9 miles away. So what do? I break protocol. I put him in my car, we drive. So we walk a half hour to the bus station where I park, we jump in the car, we head over to the nearest workforce development agency. We get there and they're full. They don't have a place for Jimmy. They tell him to put his name on a list in case other parolees fail to show up the very next week. Perhaps they'll make a spot for him. And he says to me that he has to explain this to his parole officer, and it sounds like what we call growing up crackhead stories. This absolutely sounds like a crackhead story. But anyway, he's worried that this parole can be violated. So we walk to Coney Island. This is a local diner chain. We debrief for the day. I spent $7 for eggs for him, some sausage and some toast. And he thanks me profusely while we're eating our breakfast, going over the day's activity. And the thing that he thanks me most for was for, quote, being there. And I wondered why. I walked with him to the first place. It was closed. There was nothing I could do. I did give him a ride. We drove, and yet there was no spot for him in that place either. What exactly did I do? And I realized the position that Jimmy was in. He is so structurally disadvantaged that he has to rely on help from strangers, well-meaning strangers, people that he barely knows, to do him favors. And I was there for him just being kind, but I was perhaps there for him giving him the ride. Anyway, this is a very strange position to be in. I'll talk. Jimmy is but one data point in this long, sort of longer history of mass incarceration in the United States. It starts in 1972. This is the last year where the U.S. jail and prison rate keeps pace with Europe. So much so that in 1972 there was a memo circulating asking whether or not prisons were necessary at all. We had about 300,000 people held in an American jail and prison. This is before we get this, which is one of the world's most famous graphs at this point. So we begin in 1973, and we do this for 27 straight years. We arrest more people at a greater rate than we did the year before. The mass incarceration, of course, are poor Black men. So much so that 60% of Black men can expect to do time in jail or prison if they drop out of high school. And 30% of those who graduate can expect to do time in jail or prison, but it doesn't just affect Black people. But anyway, this is the graph. Next slide, please. And we know that mass incarceration is a crisis of racial justice. We know that Black folks are twice as likely to be arrested and 5 times more likely to be incarcerated. And I talked to you about the rates or the experiences of incarceration, the likelihood that nearly 1/3 of Black men can expect to spend some time in jail or prison at some point in the next slide, please. But it doesn't just stop at the Black family. Latin people are 1.3 times more likely to be incarcerated than their white counterparts. Poor white people in this country represent 38% of the jail or prison census. So if we release every Black prisoner today, we still have nearly 1 million white people in American jails or prisons. It's not just the Black question. We know that 49% of Black boys will be arrested before they turn 23, but so will 38% of white boys before they turn the age of 23 in this country. And we overwhelmingly punish our poor. 57% of men and 72% of women in prison live below the poverty line. Up to 80% qualify as indigent for the purposes of legal defense. Next slide. But it's also a public health crisis. HIV prevalence is 5 times higher in jails and prisons. Hepatitis C 9 times higher. There was a study in 2009 that told us that well over 1/3 of all communicable diseases had passed through a jail or prison in the year before it expressed itself in the general population. And this is a population that's rapidly aging. These are things that we all knew before the COVID-19 pandemic, before the pandemic, which is why anyone who paid attention knew that COVID would be a death sentence for people who were locked away. Next slide. There's also a mental health crisis. 15% of people in prison, 20% of people in jail experience a serious mental health crisis, Jimmy included. Jails and prisons are the largest mental health provider in 44 out of 50 states in the United States. Next slide. But the prison is just one part of this vast carceral network. I've been talking about people who've been to jails or prisons. So this is a bar graph. It's just the first bar in a set of relations that I'll present in a second. But it represents the nearly 2 million people who are locked away in American jail or prison. Right now, we're looking at somewhere between 1.8, 1.9 million people. At the height of mass incarceration, this was 2007, 2008, there was something like 2.4 million people in American jail or prison. We hover around 2 million even in years of decline. Next slide, please. But this pales in comparison to the number of people on probation or parole. Nearly 5 million people are on probation or parole each year, between 4 and 5 million, depending on how it fluctuates, Jimmy being one of these folks. Next slide, please. But this pales in comparison to the number of people who are held in jails or detention centers across the country. If we switch the unit of analysis from a point in time count to the number of people who are processed through an institution, you know that 10 million to 12 million people are processed in jails each year. Every year. Next slide, please. And this number pales in comparison to the number of people who have a felony record. 19 million Americans have a felony record. 19 million. This is a figure 5 times the size of the prison population. A figure that gets no love, though. Nobody pays attention, really, to this question. Next slide, please. 1 in 3 U.S. adults, though, has a criminal record of some 80 million Americans. This is from the Bureau of Justice Statistics. This isn't some super empathetic, or extra progressive or whatever the moniker might be. This is the Bureau of Justice Statistics. This figure comes from 2014. We've known this for a decade. Next slide, please. So what this tells us is that communities where the action is. Next slide, please. And the prison, despite its place in the public's imagination, is a small slice. It represents just 3% of this pie of a vast carceral network. Next slide, please. So what does this look like? How does it express itself in everyday life? I talked to you about Jimmy and the rejections that Jimmy faced just trying to make his appointment. The no's. We'll come back to Jimmy in a second. This is a screenshot from a very old version of the first iteration of the National Inventory of the Collateral Consequences of a Criminal Conviction. It was first put together by members of the American Bar Association. This was probably like a decade ago. And this was like counting, a cataloging of the number of laws, policies, and administrative sanctions that target people with criminal records. These are the kinds of things that keep people who have a criminal record. Remember, 1 in 3 Americans have a criminal record. Remember, 38% of white boys have a criminal record, have been arrested. The number of laws, policies, administrative sanctions that target people with criminal records. And when they finished counting, they initially came up with 48,000. That number's dropped down to about 44 after reforms. These are laws on top of laws. 44,000. This includes 18,000 employment restrictions across the country. This includes 1,000 housing restrictions across the country. This includes 1,000 restrictions on civic participation. But the devil's in the details always. Can we go to the next slide, please? If we think about our home state of Illinois, 1,300 of these laws, including 476 in target employment, 700 when you include business licensure and property rights. This means entrepreneurship for most people. For most people. You know, this is the ability to open a shop, to do things like hair, which required, by the way, an Illinois legislative act to allow people with criminal records to do hair. It was not until 2016. 172 that constrain political and civic participation. 45 that limit family and domestic rights. 30 that are listed under housing and residency. What does this look like? Next slide, please. I'm sorry. I'm like pointing at you like, here we go. All right, what this means is that in most states, you can't hold public office. That's certainly the case. You can hold like some state level offices, you can hold federal office, but things like administrative elected offices at the city level, so things like being an alderman is challenging in a city like Chicago. But in most places, you can't hold public office. You couldn't groom a dog in our state. You couldn't groom a dog because you needed to pass a good character clause to do that. And good character is something that's decided upon based on things like one's criminal record. You may not adopt or foster a child. You may have to give up your parental rights altogether. There was reporting done in 2015. Eli, I forget his last name, wonderful reporting on the number of people who lost their children based on the fact that they were sent to prison, not because of child abuse or neglect, but because of statutes that trigger automatic termination of people's parental rights based on something called the Adoption and Safe Families Act. And that procedure begins anywhere from 6 months after one's incarceration. The upper limit is something like 18 months. And so people who have been incarcerated for that period of time, just because of the fact of their incarceration, were losing their parental rights, not because they were accused of child abuse or neglect. 30,000 people lost rights to their children. This is like 2015, 2016. There was just a story that came out in Mother Jones today about the triggering of child protective services when women test positive for methamphetamine or cocaine or something like that. It has nothing to do with their behavior. It has everything to do with the fact that they use tests that have 50% or higher false positives in hospitals across the country. This is a Mother Jones story that came out today, but this is the over-criminalization of everything. So a third of us have a criminal record, a third of Americans have a criminal record, and all of us are subject to this kind of logic that says the way to respond to danger and harm is to protect ourselves, to separate ourselves from others, to sequester ourselves away. Next, please. Of course, you can be fired on a whim. Of course, you can be evicted. But what does all this produce? It produces precarity. A study from someone who I was very proud to be on a dissertation committee, Dr. Lucius Paluti, found with the Prison Policy Institute that if you were ever arrested, you are something like people who have been arrested are something like 7 times more likely than members of the general population to experience homelessness. And if you've been arrested more than once, you're something like 13 times more likely to experience homelessness. And other people who experience it, Black women bear the brunt of this kind of housing precarity. Black women more than any other group exacerbates health and mental health issues. It filters the American family. It's another revolving door into this homelessness that I mentioned. We can keep going. I skipped the slide. It's also a crisis of disability. 38% of incarcerated people have experienced some sort of disability. This includes 23% that have some sort of cognitive disability, 12% that experience a disability related to vision, 11% have an ambulatory disability. We haven't talked about things like IEP in schools, like this kind of thing, where people maybe have a learning disability or something like that. Like that, we don't even have an accurate count of this. These are the kinds of disabilities that will qualify you for a disability benefit, meaning you can't work. 38%. Let's go. And how do we respond? We typically respond with services. So this is wonderful. It's wonderful to respond with services. We need a robust service infrastructure to meet the needs of people who are coming home with so many disadvantages. But I'll ask a really important question. You know, when we look at this group that I've described, a group that we've learned to fear and loathe and hold with great disdain, a group, half of which have been locked away for a crime of violence. About half of all prisoners in the United States have been locked away for a crime of violence. We say we do incarceration because of violence, but when we look at who we incarcerate, mentally ill folks, 38% with disabilities, 80% qualify as indigents, are we talking about violence and vulnerability? What are we talking about? And does vulnerability lead to particular forms of violence even? This is a new problem. I should stay on something.
We'll get you there.
Let's keep going. We respond with services, but this is really a question of citizenship, not necessarily individual behavior. Behavior is important. People need to stop and think. People need all sorts of cognitive interventions, all this stuff. But Jimmy did everything right. He went and showed up at the social service agency that they told him to show up at. When he couldn't do that, he elicited help from a well-meaning helper to do the favor of dropping him off at the next one. And it was closed. There was not enough infrastructure to meet his need. And what are we talking about when we talk about 44,000 laws, policies, and regulations that prevent you from doing things like accessing housing, feeding your family, even spending time with you? No, this is an alternate legal reality. This is a question of exclusion, not just. Now, I'm not saying that people don't rob people don't steal, people don't hurt people don't murder people don't shoot people don't steal cars. All those things are true. This group, 80% poor, 38% disabled. This is the group that we're locking away. It's not just behavior. This is a problem that filters into most intimate relations. Let's go to the next one. So let's talk about Jimmy and his mother for a second, as I bring us home into my set of policy recommendations. So I caught up with Jimmy about 6 months after this meeting that I told you about, where he was denied, talked to me about how happy he was that he had somebody he could rely on. And I talked to his mother at some point, and I wondered how his relationship was with her. So I asked him how his mother was doing, how he was doing, this kind of thing. And he told me he didn't talk to her anymore. And I was curious about why he stopped talking to his mother. And when I met his mother, she was so happy to care for Jimmy. She was so happy that he was doing things like he had found a church to go to. He was participating in my studies. She, like him, was grateful for that for some reason. He had done all this civic work. He'd done all these programs inside prisons. And she was more than willing to help him, would let him stay on her couch. You know, Jimmy, it's very hard to find a place to stay if you have a criminal record. I talked to you about the 1,000 labor market. I'm sorry. I talked about 18,000 labor market restrictions. I talked about 1,000 housing restrictions. And Michigan's not much better than Illinois, with 700 employment regulations when you count things related to things like entrepreneurship. But so he needed a place to stay, and he was staying actually in an abandoned building. We can have a conversation about that during Q&A if you like. But I asked him what's up with his mother, who told me she was looking forward to letting him stay there, and he said he stayed away from it. And I asked him why, and he told me that his mother said that the landlord confronted her because he knew that Jimmy had gotten home from prison. And he told her that if she let him stay any longer, he would be forced to put her. Now, some of this has to do with being a good landlord. Good landlords keep crime away from buildings. That's the presumption. So there's a cultural norm around what it means to be good at landlording. Some of this has to do with the 1985 Drug Abuse Act, which says, this is in public housing, but it filtered into everywhere in the practices of everywhere, which say that the tenant or anyone that the tenant has control of, if they have committed a crime, if they've ever committed a crime, that the tenants in public housing could be evicted. This has to do with the 1996 Clinton administration State of the Union address, where the president at the time, Bill Clinton, announced that we need to take the crime fight to housing. And then it was the inauguration of something called the first strike rule, where you get one strike, the one strike rule, where you one strike me out if you ever committed a crime and you're in public housing. That folks should proceed with eviction hearings, should bar folks from having access. 6 months after that address, by the way, the number of denials in public housing across the country based on the fact that someone had a criminal record in their background, or someone in their home did, something like double. And the number of evictions just 6 months after the announcement increased. So there's policy behind it, and there's also cultural norms about what it means to be good at your job. He told me he stayed away from the person who helped him the most because he knew she would help him, and he didn't want to put her in that position. This is what I call the price of partial citizenship, exclusion from the political family and culture. Laws on top of laws. Laws are different for Jimmy than they are for anybody else. I cannot compel my students to take drug tests. I should. I mean, I wish I could. Plenty of high students. But if I do that, every lawyer in this area will be on the phone with me. We can compel Jimmy to do things we can't do with anyone else. He has laws on top of laws. People have laws called administrative sanctions that target people like him. And he gets a set of not quite laws when he leaves, that if he violates them, he can be rearrested. These are the conditions of release. Different set of expectations for him than for everyone else. And so no matter what we do with Jimmy's behavior, no matter how we respond to Jimmy's behavior, this is the conditions in which Jimmy lives. Conditions, by the way, that make things like turning back to crime, make things like feelings of hopelessness, make things like one's mental health condition, the negative effects of having a mental health diagnosis that exacerbates these sorts of things. We've known this, by the way, at least criminologists have for about 100 years, that things like exclusion from housing, exclusion from employment, severing of social ties. We talk about these as pro-social bonds when people don't have these things. Civic participation, when that blocks of their civic participation, that these things generate more crime, not less. We've known that for literally 100 years. Every criminological textbook has sections on each of these categories that I call legal exclusions. Despite this, what we do when someone makes a mistake is we begin to exclude them from things. So what can be done? Well, first we have to remember that mass incarceration is a number of different kinds of crises. It's not just about crime. So it's not, so in other words, it's not just about what people do. This is not to say that people don't commit crimes, or that we shouldn't have a response to crime. It's not my position. People commit crimes. We should probably have a response to crime. But mass incarceration is not just about crime. In fact, crime is not just about crime. Are we talking about violence? Are we talking about crime? Or are we talking about vulnerability? 80% poor, 38% disabled. The largest mental health institutions in 44 out of 50 states are jails and prisons. But it's also a housing crisis, an employment crisis. It's a political crisis because of the way we do law and policy. Mass incarceration is ultimately a problem of citizenship. Out of fear, we legislated, in fact, a less safe world. So what happens when we take risk? We produce a different society. This is study. What a bad typo. But and these are old slides. But Jimmy managed to stay out of prison because he finds a network of support, people who take risks on him. He has this old dope dealer who gives him a place to stay. The old dope dealer turns his life around. He starts buying real estate and investing, and becomes this guy who does like second chance housing for people. There's a pastor who encourages him and accepts him, writes him a letter that when he was in prison, was writing him since he was in prison, and accepts him when he comes out. I can tell you about a drug robber named Lorenzo, who knocked on the door of a community-based organization that at first didn't have a place for him to stay, and eventually let him in. He used to be a drug robber. He used to shoot people, rob dope dealers for a living. But he was brought into the fold. He was given work at that place, hired and then promoted over and over again. He now runs the organization. He has a quite productive life. But this is people filling in the gaps left in the wake of what is the failure of the state ultimately. This is a problem of governance, a failure of governance of our end to hold up our part of the bargain when we talk about rehabilitation. Let's keep going. So how do we get free? Structural problems require structural solutions. We have to advocate for change in law and policy. We've got 44,000 of these joints on the books. 44,000. Do we need 44,000? We can't need 44,000. We have to provide a bridge to resources. We're talking about resource poor people. They need a bridge to resource rich institutions. Resource rich institutions where decisions about things like employment and participation in civic life can be made. We have to launch careful media campaigns and center experiences over outcomes. You know, it's very, you know, I talk about folks like Jimmy and a million other people, you know, most places that I go across the country. And I've been talking about this for a long time, and not just me, a bunch of people have talked about things related, but it's striking how many people don't know stories, don't know about the structural disadvantages that people like Jimmy face when they walk out the door, don't know that 38% of the prison population has a disability, don't know that there's so many laws and policies that prevent people from having a first chance, let alone a second. I think we have to focus on something like human thriving instead of just risk reduction. We have to think carefully about how we support people. We have to leverage resources to help families. We, of course, have to vote. We can go to the next slide. But most importantly, I think we have to listen to formerly incarcerated people, because there's something about being close to the ground that reveals things that being distant just can't. So, for example, there's a local leader, Marc Chamberlain, who runs the Finally Free campaign. And Marlon did time. And Marlon is helping us to understand how things that he calls, you know, what I read about Islamic consequences, something like that. He writes about these things as permanent punishments, and he helps us to understand how permanent punishments show up and shape people's lives. And so the thing I think that we have to do is we have to invest in people, and not just in their ability to say get a low paid job or something like that, or to have access to a set of services. But I think we have to invest in the leadership of people who we locked away. And they're good models for this. You know, the guy who I mentioned, the drug robber, he becomes executive director of the program that he runs. I can think about Precious Blood Ministries that brings in people who committed acts of violence, sometimes terrible acts of violence, but their acts of radical hospitality involve trusting people and believing in their skills and building up their skills and putting them in a position of leadership. I was at a summer function, a summer event, a kind of a block party with Precious Blood Ministries, and at Precious Blood Ministries last September. And I can't tell you how many kids who used to hold guns were streaming in off the streets to have a conversation with the young brother who works over teen outreach, a brother who was locked down himself, a brother who took a group of them to Birmingham to see the Heritage Museum, you know, all these wonderful things. And what they were talking to them about were the jobs that they applied for, the schools that they finished, and the things that they were up to. These are kids who are poised to change their lives. Let's go. There's no social movement organization, no successful social movement has been led by people who weren't directly impacted by the thing they were trying to challenge. That goes for women's rights, that goes for LGBTQ rights, civil rights, any of these big rights. This includes the rights for full citizenship for people who we locked away. We need people. But maybe I'll tell you one last story in my time with you. This is a dear friend, Ronald Simpson Bay, who just wrote an essay about the things that the Biden administration needs to be paying attention to as Biden is beginning to transition out. Anyway, he's a national leader and a national leader in the movement to reform the criminal justice system in this country. Ronald did 27 years on a wrongful conviction. He was accused of shooting a police officer. He wasn't at the scene of the crime. Eventually, his sentence was reversed. He was let out of prison in 2012, and he's pushed for criminal justice reform ever since. He hasn't looked back. But I asked him what happened, what it was like for him while he was spending those 27 years. And about a decade into that 27-year period, his son was murdered. He had a son who was murdered. He was murdered by a 14-year-old boy. And so Ronald is in prison on a wrongful conviction. He might be listening on this live stream. And his son is murdered. And I asked what it was like for him. He said it was hard in those first years. I can imagine it was the contradiction that he was living with, you know, being in prison for nothing that he did, literally nothing that he did. And then his son, a boy who carries his name. And I asked what you do next. And he's been reading a lot, and he's a deeply spiritual dude, but he's also really smart. He's a jailhouse lawyer. He's been a reform advocate, like social justice leader and movement maker and doer and shaker for. The thing he decided to do was advocate for the boy who killed his son. He wrote to the judge and he wrote to the prosecutor and he asked the boy, we tried as a juvenile instead of an adult, if the boy would have a chance in life when he got out. And I had no idea why he did it. I couldn't figure out why. I couldn't figure out why Ronald was the one that forgot, Ronald was Superman, and all these things. But I wondered if the boy was special. Was there something about the boy that made him special? Was he civically active? Was he really smart? Was he a handsome guy? No, he wasn't exceptional. He might have a job at McDonald's now. Do you hope that he becomes president of the United States? Is he the next Barack Obama? No. Did you love him? Did you learn to love the boy? Is that why you forgave him in this deep way? He said, forgiveness without works is dead. And it was very hard for him to conceive of loving this child because he had killed his son. Who would love him? I mean, this is like Lifetime movie or something. It's not real life to expect this from anybody. So Ronald, why did you do it? He said, I did it because it was the right thing to do. Next slide, please. He said that boy losing his life wouldn't bring back my sons. And he believed that boy deserved the same thing that everybody deserves, a place in the world where he belongs, and perhaps to feel as if he belongs. Now, this required deep vulnerability. The boy could blow it. He could go off and he could get back involved in crime, he could go back to prison, and Ronald's sacrifice could feel like a waste. But for Ronald, he took the vulnerable position because for Ronald, it was the right thing to do. He had an ethical commitment to the right thing. He did what his ethics required, not what felt good in the moment. This raises a different kind of question. So I think we live in strange and marvelous times. I think it's marvelous because we're thinking about questions, because you invited me and Jens, Robert Vargas, and a bunch of folks to come to a place like this and talk to you about things that you might experiment, things you might try, ways that you might make the world better. There's a sense that there's too much incarceration in this country. There's a sense that the things that we tried don't work. They don't, by the way. The recidivism rate, they followed 400,000 people released across 30 states in 2014. The recidivism rate was well over 70%. They followed them 9 years later. The recidivism rate for that group, that cohort, was 83%. So we know prisons don't really work. They don't prevent crime. They don't keep people from coming back. We know they don't really work. That group, the average number of arrests for that group during that period was 10. Arrests don't keep people from engaging in crime or being rearrested. So we're asking different questions, perhaps because we've reached a place where we realize it's unsustainable to continue in the direction we've gone. And I think that's marvelous. I think we need to ask a different question. And we live in strange times because there's so many people locked away that we produce this alternate legal reality I'm talking about. But I think we need to ask different kinds of questions. I try to ask different questions empirically, different questions theoretically, like what does this mean? What does it mean for society? What does it mean for democracy? These kind of questions I wrestle with in a scientific way. But the question before us is ethical one. I think that we produce this alternate legal reality. I think we live in something like a supervised society. The question for us is, what kind of society do we want? Which is my last slide. So thank you so much for your time. So the actionable policy items, things that I think that this group can work on are two things. One is something like a leadership institute. So that folks like Ronald Simpson Bay can help us think through, how we respond to harm when it happens. Something like a leadership institute, there are models for this. Just Leadership USA is one that comes to mind. I'm on their board, so shameless plug, but it's an incredible organization. And what it does is something akin to capacity building with formerly incarcerated people who are already leading efforts across, in their neck of the woods, and they help them be better leaders. It's like a leadership institute, specifically for formerly incarcerated leaders, I think that's one giant thing that we can do. I think another thing that we can do is we can think about appointing someone to do a review of the law and policy mechanisms that we enact in the name of public safety. So 44,000 laws and policies, do we need 44,000? And who should be at the head of a review like that? I think in a city like this, you've got an embarrassment of riches, in part because we've arrested so many people, and in part because there's just so much talent in our city. But someone like Marlon Chamberlain, someone like Joseph Maps from Precious Blood Ministries, someone like Willette Benford, who works in the governor's office, they could lead what looks like an audit of the policy levers that we think reduce crime. And they could partner with universities to run experiments to see what has crime reduction possibilities and what doesn't. I'll tell you, of the 1,300 or so on the books in Illinois, very few have any crime reduction capacities. And I think in doing these things, we can develop responses to the needs of this group in ways that better reflect that actually existing lived experiences. This isn't to say that we don't need services. This isn't to say that we don't need behavioral change or something like that. It's absolutely true. These are things that are absolutely needed. But what we're talking about is the world in which people move. And these are things that I think could be taken on by a group like this.
Thank you so much. I have a few questions, but let me first defer to other commissioners. Anyone have a question, either who's in the room or participating virtually?
Well, I'll take that as a cue.
Yeah. Commissioner Austin, if you may, please.
Ruben, I thank you for your presentation today. It resonated a lot with what I heard in sessions out here at the Congressional Black Caucus Conference around Black Lives Matter, around dealing with the formerly exonerated persons. You didn't even talk about the number of falsely accused folks that are in prisons and what they have to deal with upon their return. But they also had a session on, it grew out of the Black Lives Matter and the George Floyd backlash kind of discussion. And that was the question of public safety and policing and those types of things. So that the questions were surveys were to community members about what does public safety look like? What do you want it to look like in your communities? And this gets to your point about asking different questions, because the responses had very little to do with policing and police presence. In fact, there was someone on the panel that indicated that police presence and police violence heightened community fear and illness, but that's a whole other discussion. But I would like to throw that question to you as to public safety. What do you think that needs to look like, given what you've just painted about the duality of these realities for persons that are just as impacted?
Yeah, no, thanks for that. I very much appreciate that. There's a lot of interesting work around the harmful impacts of things like over policing in communities that are over policed. I'm thinking specifically of a set of papers from sociologist Alyosha Sewell at Emory, who quantifies the number of arrests necessary to decrease community public. She does really striking work. And so in like over police neighborhoods. So now I'm not being accurate. So just let me just give an example. She finds something like after the third like unwarranted stop, that community mental health decreases by X. You know, it's really fascinating. And we know that, like the pretextual, textual police stops have been shown to be, you know, hugely problematic, in that, in most cases, police stops largely don't end with someone stopping someone who's committed a crime, who's on their way to commit a crime or something like that. The evidence shows that, somewhere close to 70, 80% of Black folks who stopped during all these stop and frisk studies that happen all across the country, from New York City to Grand Rapids, Michigan, for example. Something like 80% of Black folks who stopped, at the very least, had no gun or contraband, and they were more likely to be stopped than their white counterparts. So this just opens the door for racial bias to show up. But your question is a question about like what community safety, not a complaint about how policing happens. It's about what does community safety, what does public safety look like? And I have a short-term and long-term answer to that. So there are a couple of things that in the short term that need to happen. I think we have to deploy police forces to things that are necessary. So I think police, and this is my opinion, I think police need to respond to crimes of violence. I think police don't need to issue traffic tickets necessarily. I think police need to respond to an active shooting. I don't think police need to respond to a noise disturbance necessary. And I'll tell you why. Because in the city of Detroit, when I was following Jimmy, the average response time from police to an active shooter was 50 minutes. 50 minutes to a live shooting event. It would take a cop 50 minutes to get there. Why? Well, some of it is cops were underpaid in the city of Detroit. It's absolutely true. It's a strained workforce. There was low morale, low enrollment. There weren't enough police, all these sorts of things. And of the people who were working there, they're doing everything. They're responding to cats and trees. They're responding to mental health crisis. They're responding, right? Police do too much. And any cop will tell you that. Any police officer will tell you, I'm not a social worker. Or I'm not, name your thing. And so I think police should respond to violence when there are reports of violence. They should investigate violence when there are reports of violence. A part of the community dissatisfaction with police are all the egregious things like murder clearance rates. We celebrate murder clearance rates when they hover above 50%, meaning when we solve 50% or more of the murders that happen in the city, we celebrate. Our murder clearance rate, I don't know what it is this year, but I know it's gone anywhere from 25% to about 40 or 50% in the years that we saw. So police forces need to be deployed. Police detectives need to be deployed to things like murders, shootings, rapes. There was a studies, this is my position now, so you asked me my opinion. There were studies across the country, lots of reporting that came out of this, beyond, it wasn't studies, it was reporting about untested rape kits. There was something like 17 or 18,000 untested rape kits, untested in our police departments hanging around. But also LA, also New York, also all the large cities. So the things that police investigate, things that they don't, things that are deployed to and things that are not. Like I think we need to marshal resources in ways that respond to things like crises that are happening. And I mean crises that infringe upon the health and well-being of people. The question of public safety, though, that's the short-term response. Deploy police to things that police need to be deployed to. The long-term, the middle-term to long-term response is that housing is a public safety question. Access to health and mental health is a public safety question. Being able to have a job is a public safety question. And 100 years of criminological research says this. It tells us that unemployment and violence, there's a link between these things. That housing instability and crime and incarceration, there's a direct link to these things. And so building city infrastructure is a public safety mechanism. But there are also things that can increase public safety, like blocks where lights don't work. In fact, the last thing I'll say on this is that there's so many studies on alternative policing methods that we could pay attention to. Problem-oriented policing, problem-solving policing. Policing looks something like, there's a lot of theft in a building. People are stealing copper out of a building. And so a problem-oriented approach might mean that salvage yards aren't able to take residential copper in the area, for example. Or that has to go through official capacity. That residential copper is painted a certain color so that it flags the salvage yard to not take the residential copper, which is scavengers break into the houses to take. There are all kinds of policing methods that come out of cities, often out of crises. If you look to Cincinnati, for example, the so-called Cincinnati miracle that happened where there was public response and police said, we're going to do community-oriented policing that looks very different than the way it looked before. These aren't perfect solutions to things, but there's evidence of ways to do it differently that we could engage. And it's not even trying a new thing, it's rolling out something that things that have already been tested.
Thank you. I would like to, no, it was a good answer. Appreciate it. I'd like to ask a couple of questions about this Leadership Institute and tie it to Mr. Bay specifically. I've had a variety of different capacities exposure to the notion of restorative justice, which is what you're alluding to here. And do you see a role for, and maybe this is about empathy, maybe this is about logic, maybe it's about a little bit of both, maybe it's about public policy. Do you see a role within such an institute to encourage and empower people to employ a restorative justice strategy when faced with crimes that are affecting their families, their communities, their lives? How do you see that working? And I'll throw in a second question. We're still on the same general topic, and that is raising the possibility of pure play. If in fact, we're talking here about actionable social policy recommendations that the county might experience, do you see an institute of the sort you identified as facilitating governmental employment returning citizens, governmental training for employment? So you talk about entrepreneurship. I think that employment is often the best path towards self-employment. But I'd be curious to learn what your take is as to both of those possibilities. And I'd also like to ask you, while I'm at it, is Mr. Bay local?
Mr. Bay lives in Atlanta and works in New York. But I can connect.
You know what?
Yeah, thinking about somebody to think about this institute. Restorative justice, I think, is a wonderful path toward.
I've seen it work so successfully where you would think, why would this guy allow somebody to get off the hook under those circumstances? But in the situations I've seen, it's so liberating for the person who makes that decision. It's kind of counterintuitive because you would think they would want their pound of flesh, but not if it's contextualized appropriately, where now they in fact can get relief from it.
Yeah, no, I mean, so I think the engine of restorative justice, the idea of repair.
Yeah.
And so what people don't typically get in a criminal justice encounter is anything that looks like what they would describe. What they would describe as healing, something to help them move on from the harm they experience. And the idea, as I understand it, behind restorative justice is that you're working to figure out what each party needs. So what does the harmed party need to be able to move forward? And what does the person who committed the act of harm need to not commit acts? And you're building something that looks like an accountable circle around these people, their expectations of the person who participates in the restorative justice system. Their expectation that they'll do X or Y thing in relation to the person. Sometimes the person who's been harmed doesn't want anything to do with them and never will, and that's okay. Sometimes the harm is understood as a harm to community. Sometimes the outcome of the circle doesn't it doesn't fully resolve. But it is a different way to approach questions of justice, and it is a way, I think it is a way that gets us closer towards something like equity. To ask the question and prepare. And this is something that's never asked. I don't think it's asked sufficiently, at least, right, when we think about it typically from the Justice Department. So when Ronald, when Mr. Simpson Bay went to go advocate for his son, no one would listen to him. He had to do a letter writing campaign to get the prosecutor and the judge to hear him, because they couldn't imagine someone who was locked away as the victim of a crime themselves. But the literature, the science tells us that the binary between victims and offenders is
Ruben, I gotta tell you, there's one circumstance where a friend of mine since passed away. His son was killed in a motor vehicle accident where his friend was driving the car. The friend was charged. And the person that I knew lobbied for a more empathetic resolution. The state's attorney would not hear it, and everybody ended up with a bad result. And no one wanted the result that actually occurred. So, to whose benefit?
Yeah.
To whose benefit?
And when people are old, when I ask families who lost someone, for example, and say that people are old, they're not satisfied. They don't want it. Some people do, but many people don't. And the thing is that families who are affected by, especially by violence, don't really have the voice. Right. So anyway, yeah, I think so. Can an institute could an institute have a Department of Restorative Justice? Could there be an institute? So absolutely. Are there other versions of this? Yes. There were wonderful places that do this important work, and I can sing the names of a few that come to mind that I've worked with in the past. And then could this institute be a pathway into government jobs? Yes, absolutely, 100%. It should be. It should be a path into government jobs, building capacity for people to do things like take on civic leadership. The thing last thing I'll say on this is that so I follow 250 people qualitatively. I'm an ethnographer of practice, meaning I spend time with small groups of people, large, but I use the research team to interview a bunch of people. I don't typically do administrative data analysis, stuff like that. I do spend time with you, learn about you, understand your life, kind of work. And what I found with the groups that I follow are that these are the most civically minded, civically engaged group, despite the limitations on their lives. And that their civic engagement often starts inside the jail or prison itself. I can't tell you how many civic leaders I've met on the outside who were HIV peer counselors on the inside, jailhouse lawyers, which have stigma behind it on the inside, et cetera. It's like a veritable training ground. People come out ready to change the world, and then they have a warrant, an internal moral warrant to do so, because they want to make their own lives. 100%. People life.
So I would appreciate your sending me any organizations, but beyond that, if there are individuals you think who might be willing to get involved in such an effort outside the commission, I'm going to press Commissioner Alston to see if he might be willing to include within his growing agenda the possibility of such an institute within the working group that he leads for community wellness and public safety, because I see, this clearly fits conceptually within that kind of an initiative. So I won't ask you here now, but I would invite you to give consideration to how we might best bring this forward within the commission.
No, that makes good sense. Sounds a little bit like creeping expansion of the territory, but I'm willing to consider
Well,
it.
we'll need some more help as we do that. Because I think logically it fits within your mandate, and unless it evolves to a point where it breaks off into its own effort unto itself. And I think given the importance of this effort, I think it very well might, especially as we recruit people outside the commission to help incubate such an idea. I do, and I don't want to monopolize this, but I do want to share with you a little funny story that ties to your very serious observation about the extraordinary number of laws that need to be revisited. I have a client. This is not a person who's in the headlines. Well, some of this will sound like it is. I have a client who has a felony record, nonviolent, and he happens to be a villain. And he happens to want to run for president. This is no one that has been in the headlines recently, who's been in the headlines from time to time. And he asked me to research as his attorney, can I run for president? And of course, the conclusion was, yes, constitutionally, you meet the constitutional requirements. You can run for president. You just can't vote for yourself. So that shows you kind of the contradiction within our laws. And that is kind of, it's kind of a comical example, but there are obviously very serious examples that have societal implications that are also very serious. So I wanted to share that with you.
Well, that's great. Great.
Are there other comments or questions from anyone on the commission? Commissioner Cooley?
Thank you so much for the presentation. It's building on a lot of the presentations we've had in the last year. Excited for all those pieces to start fitting together. But on your second recommendation around starting the audit of the laws in Illinois, in particular, I guess for our focus, particularly in Cook County, and then I guess the ones that be dependent upon Illinois law to change as well. Are there other models for places that have done that kind of audit we can build from or look at? Done that deep dive with local guidance and regulation?
Point you to an organization in the state of Michigan called Nation Outside. And some of the leaders in Nation Outside, one person thinking of specifically named Josh O. And what Nation Outside did was they partnered with a number of folks, people from government, academics, et cetera, to think through a bunch of clean slate laws. There's many versions of this in all these clean slate laws that you see popping up across the country. To think about, okay, what becomes available to somebody when a record becomes sealable at year 7? So folks thought it through in that. I will point you to a local organization that's thought about the laws themselves. Organizations are strong word, but I probably put you to Martin Chamberlain here, who works with the Finally Free campaign. And then I'd give you an example of following some of these laws out that happen at Cook County, which have to do around the changes that happen with housing passed alongside the end of money bail. I'm sorry. I can't think of the pretrial fairness act included a housing provision, included provisions for housing at the county level, as I understand it. And I don't know if it was just a recommendation, but there were discussions that were happening, if I remember around the time, around questions of housing for credit agencies, for example, to report in the county, and I don't know who was leading this, but I was contacted by a reporter about this, to report for their reporting to be in line with the changed law. So that certain kinds of convictions wouldn't be revealed in others. So to your point about are there examples of a full-on audit? No, I don't have any of this. But I have this sort of piecemeal examples of people who followed out portions of say one version of another of the laws, to think about how to advocate for change, later, which is why I'm proposing something, a more global art. And to partner with universities, not just nonprofit.
Yeah, well, of course, the commission sees itself as having a role in leveraging thought leadership. And much of what we have done has been followed in other jurisdictions. But so if we were to undertake something of that nature, it might inspire others to follow suit in other counties and cities and states around the country. Is this, given your relationship with the American Bar Foundation, do you see this as something that they might be interested in collaborating on?
If there, it's something worth presenting and seeing which of the research professors might want to take it on. But we all have our, like, all the research professors have their, yeah, exactly. I just as a suggestion, I might take on one group of the laws. If I was in your position, I might.
Oh, I thought you were speaking for yourself.
No.
No, okay.
No,
No such law.
I do different work, you know, I do mostly qualitative work, but I might, if I were interested, I would look at saying, I would pick, I'd say, okay, employment, you know, I pick those,
There's so many.
there's so many, I mean, there's 1,300, like perhaps there's not enough bandwidth for 1,300.
Of course, if we limit it to the county, it shrinks it some.
That does.
Yeah.
That does, yeah.
In a related question, has there been any assessment of like which are the biggest barriers, which across the 13? Sure that some are very specific, maybe don't impact too many, others might be impacting a lot of folks.
Yeah, you know, it's,
Kind of the work.
yeah, you know, yes, there's a bunch of research on which barriers, what are the big pots of barriers to people's, that lead to more or less recidivism. And it's always housing, substance use, employment. So housing and employment are the big, housing, employment, and substance use are the big three. So, unemployment, you know, there are all these causal links between unemployment and recidivism. Check the box. Exactly. All these causal links between, that have been shown in the data, shown in the research, between housing, precarity, and unemployment. It's substance use. There's less, the research has done some of the reverse stuff on questions like civic participation. So it's shown that once arrested people are less civically active, for example. They avoid institutions. You know, there's a literature of people called system avoidance. So, well, is somebody likely to go to hospital if they have a criminal record like this? So then you can draw conclusions from that literature. This is, you draw conclusions. It's not causal, but you can draw conclusions about how a criminal record, for example, shapes the ways that people seek help or engage in the kinds of things that might improve their health. Like, so there's literature in that way. But the big three are that where the link is between these three outcomes and recidivism, particularly rearrest, are housing, unemployment, and addiction. The problem with recidivism as measured is that recidivism is a count of getting caught. So it doesn't tell us about people's engagement in crime. There are links between unemployment among this group and, for example, the health and mental health outcomes. You know, it's this stuff like that, that gets more at the texture of people's lives, I think, than recidivism. But those three are the big indicators for like economists, public policy people around recidivism.
All right, are there any other questions or comments from any of the commissioners? If not, we will thank you, and to the extent that you can furnish some names, make some introductions, better still, we would very much welcome that. And we would also, if you're willing, invite you to collaborate with us as we think through these possibilities, because obviously your experience in this area is extraordinary. And it'll save us some steps if we can use you as a resource as we move forward. I'm happy to, very, very, very kind of you. Thank you so much. And you're welcome to stick around. I think our meeting will only last a few minutes more anyway. Let me just ask the chairs of the working groups who are present whether they have reports. Commissioner Cooley, do you have something to report to the commission?
So working with Commissioner and I, our chair, so we're the public assets working group, so focused on how can the county support filling in holes, where services that are generally provided by the commercial market in many communities but are not provided in lower income communities, particularly grocers, pharmacies, housing, childcare, other services such as those. How can the county help support making sure that they're there and partner with other partners? So working on an ordinance that would develop a task force, a short-term task force to really come up with some partnership opportunities and solutions.
Right.
So looking to work with a researcher partner who could help generate the report, but have representation from economic development, you at the president's office, working with the mayor's office, because they are also pursuing public option for potential for a grocery store right now, also looking at public banking in some different spaces. So really looking to get that launched in the near term. And then getting the commission or the task force launched in the spring, and then having a set of policy recommendations to come back with.
Look forward. Commissioner. And, okay, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Okay, and we've got copies.
No, we do have, we've been working with Roger, to create the language for the task force. I do have it, with me now. If we're going to take a look, digitally. And get feedback from folks.
Thank you. Oh, thanks.
We can do feedback electronically. Okay.
In conversation with Commissioner Flores. Before, this won't be like that.
Well, it's unfortunate that our turnout today is a little light because I would love to get broader input. Was there a specific timeline that's been considered, Roger?
We're hoping to introduce next week at the board, but we won't be moving forward on this until probably November. So we have time.
Okay.
So there'll be time to. And then in November commission meeting.
Yeah, maybe we
We
could
could,
distribute it in advance of the meeting. That might be helpful. Okay, well, thank you very much. To me, at first blush, it looks like a very useful approach and a practical one. Thank you very much.
One
Thank
thing
you.
that's making me think about, I don't know if I'm mixing things up or thinking wrong, is I remember the state is like made available or so they have resources for this sort of thing, yeah.
they do, they have a fund through TCO. About 10 million, and right now there's currently the NFO.
And so is it something that could, like this sort of idea could take advantage of?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of it's how to labor in all the public resources as well.
No,
Smart, these developments happen in the areas.
yeah, looks like really significant progress. Thank you, Commissioner Cooley. Very much appreciate it.
And very appreciative. Commissioners and I teams have been.
Yeah, thank you as well. Thank you. Commissioner Austin, do you in fact have a report on your working group's progress?
I do not at this time. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, okay, thank you. Does anyone else have anything to report to the commission or advise the commission? If not, I think we can safely adjourn. I won't ask for a motion because we don't have a quorum. But I think it nevertheless was a very productive session, and I very much appreciate everybody's participation. Thanks so much. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.